Jim Carrey, the pain behind the laughter. What if the funniest man alive was also one of the most broken? What if every time he made you laugh until your stomach hurt, he was doing it just to stop himself from falling apart? That's not a movie plot. That's the real life of Jim Carrey. And once you hear the full story, you'll never watch his films the same way again. Most people know Jim Carrey as the guy who talked through his backside in Ace Ventura, or the rubber-faced comedian who could turn his face into something that looked like it belonged in a cartoon. But behind all that wild energy, behind those enormous eyes, and that unforgettable grin, was a man carrying wounds so deep that he spent decades hiding them behind every joke he ever told. This is the story he never wanted to tell, until now. Jim Carrey was born on January 17, 1962, in a tiny town in Ontario, Canada. He was the youngest of 4 kids, growing up in a small, crowded house where noise and money problems went hand in hand. His father, Percy Carrey, had once been a musician, a saxophone player with a genuine love for jazz. But by the time Jim came along, Percy had traded his passion for a desk job at an accounting firm, earning about $8,000 a year. His mother, Kathleen, spent much of her life battling illness, often confined to bed for days at a time, while the family tried to hold everything together. From the very beginning, Jim understood something that most kids don't figure out until much later: that working hard doesn't always protect you from hardship. But even in that cramped, struggling household, something extraordinary was happening. By the age of 8, Jim was standing in front of the bathroom mirror for hours, twisting his face into every expression imaginable, making his siblings stop whatever they were doing just to watch him. At 10 years old, he wrote a letter to the famous comedian Carol Burnett, introducing himself as a master impressionist. When she actually wrote back, he pinned that letter to his wall like it was a medal. That letter became his promise to himself. At school, every classroom was a stage. He impersonated teachers, mimicked movie stars, and got thrown out regularly, but he kept coming back. The other kids called him Rubberface. He took it as a compliment. Then, when Jim was 13, the bottom fell out completely. The factory where Percy worked shut down without warning. He was 51 years old, and suddenly, he had nothing. He sent out 73 job applications to accounting firms across the province. 73 letters. 73 rejections. With Kathleen's medical bills piling up and no income coming in, Percy eventually had to take whatever work he could find, which meant a janitorial position, paying $4 an hour. He was cleaning bathrooms in the same kind of factory where he had once been respected as an accountant. Jim watched his father mop floors, and that image, that quiet humiliation, cut so deep into him that it never healed. A few months later, the family lost their home. For 2 years, from 1974 to 1976, the Carrey family lived out of a yellow Volkswagen van parked near Lake Ontario. Percy and Kathleen slept inside. Jim and his brother John slept in a tent beside it. In Canada, in winter, waking up with frost on their sleeping bags. Every morning they washed up at a gas station before school. Some nights, Jim dug sandwiches out of the trash and heated them on a small stove inside the van. The entire family took night shifts cleaning factories for $32 per 8-hour stretch. During the day, Jim sat in school half asleep, wearing dirty clothes, trying to focus on lessons when his mind was somewhere completely different. By 15, his mother's condition had gotten so bad she couldn't walk on her own. Jim started skipping school to take care of her. At 16, he dropped out entirely and started working full-time alongside his father. Every night he was a janitor. Every morning he came home, helped Kathleen out of bed, bathed her, made her meals, and sat with her telling jokes until she smiled. She called him her little sunshine. He called those jokes his armor. Now here's the part that most people don't know. In 1982, Jim walked into the bathroom and found his father unconscious on the floor. Percy had swallowed an entire bottle of pills. Jim was 20 years old. He called emergency services, and paramedics managed to save his father's life. It was only later that Percy admitted this wasn't the first time. He had attempted suicide twice before, while the family was still living in the van. That discovery never left Jim. It became a fear he carried everywhere, the terrifying possibility that the same darkness lived somewhere inside him too. And that fear, more than anything else, is what kept him moving. He never stopped working. He never allowed himself to slow down, because slowing down meant facing what was underneath. But even in those darkest years, there were sparks of light. At 15, Percy drove Jim to a comedy club in Toronto called Yuk Yuk's for his very first performance. Kathleen picked out a bright polyester tracksuit for him because she thought that's what television comedians wore. Jim walked on stage and bombed completely. The audience barely responded. On the quiet drive home, Percy didn't say much, but he was secretly proud of his son just for getting up there. Jim learned something important that night. Failing wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of figuring out how to do it right. At 16, with his family still trapped in poverty and everyone working nights just to survive, Jim started sneaking comedy practice into his work breaks, imitating old-school comedians, building characters, writing jokes in his head while mopping floors. By 17, he got paid $20 for a 20-minute set. It wasn't much, but it was proof. He auditioned for Saturday Night Live in 1980. He didn't even get to meet the producers. The rejection stung badly. But instead of giving up, he did something smarter. He stopped trying to imitate other people and started creating characters that only he could play. In 1990, he joined In Living Color, a groundbreaking sketch comedy show on Fox. And within weeks, it was clear that Jim Carrey was unlike anyone who had ever been on television before. His character Fire Marshal Bill, grotesquely funny, unpredictable, completely unhinged, became the thing people talked about at work and school the next day. He appeared in over 120 sketches over 5 seasons. He worked 80-hour weeks. He gained and lost 20 pounds in a single week to fit different characters. He sprained his ankle during a dance sequence and kept filming in agony for the rest of the week without telling anyone. To keep up with that punishing schedule, he started relying on Adderall. And back home, his marriage was quietly falling apart. He had met Melissa Womer in 1987. She had known him before the fame, before the money, before any of it. But after In Living Color made him a household name, everything changed. The late nights, the lifestyle that came with sudden celebrity, it was too much. In 1995, Melissa filed for divorce. The man she had married was gone, replaced by someone she no longer recognized. And then came 1994, the year that changed everything. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective was released, made for just $15 million. Nobody thought it would work. A comedy about a detective who specializes in finding missing animals? With that guy from the sketch show? The studios laughed. Then the film earned $72 million in the US alone, plus another $17 million internationally. Nearly 40% of Jim's dialogue was completely made up on the spot. He didn't just play Ace Ventura, he became him. He stopped bathing. He slept in the character's apartment on set. He dyed his hair. The line between Jim Carrey and Ace Ventura became genuinely blurry. That same year, The Mask earned $352 million worldwide. Dumb and Dumber earned $270 million. 3 massive hits in a single calendar year. He went from earning $350,000 per film to $7 million to $20 million, almost overnight. And yet, the more money he made, the worse he felt. While promoting Dumb and Dumber, Jim had a mental breakdown. He admitted to hallucinations, to cocaine use, to feeling like a clown pretending to be happy while falling apart behind the scenes. He described himself as wearing a mask, not the green one from the movie, but the mask of someone performing joy while drowning in something he couldn't name. He had been on Prozac since the 1980s. He described what he felt as a lingering despair that never truly went away. Not even during his greatest successes. Not even when the whole world was laughing. When he filmed The Truman Show in 1998, director Peter Weir pushed him to his absolute physical and emotional limits. The storm sequence required 150 takes. Jim was nearly drowned on set. Wave after wave crashed over him in a massive artificial tank. And when he finally filmed the moment where Truman touches the wall of his fake world and steps out into the unknown, it took only one take. The crew stood in silence. Nobody laughed, they just watched. That scene became one of the most iconic moments in cinema history. And Jim Carrey said it was the closest he had ever come to expressing something true about himself. For Man on the Moon, he lost nearly 40 pounds to play Andy Kaufman. He stayed in character so completely that even off-camera, between takes, he was Andy Kaufman. He injected himself with a saline solution to simulate the physical effects of illness. Danny DeVito had to step off set just to gather himself. When the documentary about that production was finally released years later, it disturbed people. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was clear that Jim had genuinely lost himself in the role. He had started to forget who he was, without a character to hide inside. In 2015, tragedy arrived in the most painful form. Catriona White, an Irish makeup artist and Jim's on-and-off girlfriend, died from a drug overdose. She left behind a note making serious allegations against him. Her family filed a lawsuit. Investigators looked into prescription bottles and text messages. The case was dismissed in 2018, but the questions it raised never fully disappeared. Jim has lived with that weight ever since. By his late 50s, something began to shift. He started talking about meditation, about spirituality, about the teachings of Eckhart Tolle. In 2017, he gave an interview at a fashion event where he told reporters there was no such thing as ego. And he clearly wasn't joking. He had started painting. Hundreds of canvases, vivid and strange and deeply personal. He spoke at community centers about forgiveness. He said, quietly and without performance, that peace doesn't come from fame or money, or any number on a box office chart. He should know. He's earned over $1 billion at the global box office. He's won 2 Golden Globes. And he once said, with the absolute certainty of someone who's tried every other option, everybody should get rich and famous, and do everything they ever dreamed of, so they can see that it's not the answer. That's the thing about Jim Carrey that gets you when you really sit with it. The boy who grew up sleeping in a tent beside a van in a Canadian winter. The teenager who worked night shifts and told jokes to his bedridden mother just to help her get through the day. The young man who found his father unconscious and never stopped being afraid after that. He turned every single one of those wounds into something the world could laugh at. And for a long time, that was enough to survive. But surviving isn't the same as living. And somewhere in his 60s, Jim Carrey finally started looking for the difference. The laughter was always real. So was the pain behind it. And now that you know both, the next time you watch him on screen, you won't just see the performance, you'll see the whole person. The one who earned every single smile he ever gave you. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the people who make us laugh the hardest are often carrying the heaviest loads. And if you want more stories like this one, real, raw, and worth your time, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next.